More than 2 million Iowans were registered to vote in the 2020 general election, a record in a state with a population of just over 3.1 million. Of 1.7 million ballots cast in the state last November, more than 1 million were submitted through the mail as absentee ballots, also a record, as many voters shunned the polls during a pandemic. Then President Donald Trump, a Republican, won Iowa, but lost the national election to Democrat Joe Biden. Now, Republicans who control Iowa's state legislature have passed a bill limiting early in-person voting and shortening the time allotted for absentee ballot submissions, among other provisions.
But the job of the State Government Committee is to ensure election integrity. You look at what you did right, what you did wrong, and you make improvements. And that's exactly what we're doing here today.
What Republicans promote as preventing potential voter fraud, Democrats see as voter suppression.
We want to make the freedom to vote as easy as possible for every single Iowa voter. I have many constituents who work multiple jobs, are parents, and they need the flexibility to vote when they have the time.
Democrats failed to eliminate what they viewed as harmful restrictions on voting, and the bill passed the state House and Senate with unified majority Republican backing. Iowa is not alone, and Democrats are sounding the alarm. At a recent hearing in Washington, newly elected Georgia Democratic Senator John Ossoff said legislation advancing in his state would disproportionately deter minority voting.
For example, to end Sunday early voting, which is used heavily by black and working class voters.
Georgia and Iowa are among dozens of states where Republicans seek to rewrite voting laws.
It's pretty widespread, and it's not surprising to me, having worked in this area of voting rights for some time, to see a backlash against a high turnout election.
Michelle Cantor-Cohen is with the Fair Election Center, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization addressing voting rights and election registration reform.
One thing that I think is really telling is that there's no rationale for it being given that makes any sense. It's not as if there was, for example, a problem with the polls being open until 9 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock. In fact, voters who work a long day may only be able to vote at that time.
Conversely, a lot of things that are meant to objectively suppress the vote have instead angered people and had them show up in record numbers.
Jessica Huseman with VoteBeat, an independent, nonpartisan news organization covering election integrity, says not all the proposed reforms are problematic.
There are a lot of states, for example, whose deadlines for requesting absentee ballots were unrealistically close to the election. And so election administrators just didn't have enough time to get those ballots out the door and have voters return them. But there is certainly no reason to change broad swaths of the election system that we have now. You see states that I think are overcorrecting from perceived but not real problems from the 2020 election in order to satisfy the most extreme parts of their base.
Voting reforms in Iowa await the signature of that state's Republican governor. The first in what Huseman says could be a wave of voting changes in multiple states ahead of the 2022 U.S. midterm elections. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Chicago.